Instead of going home, Krista called Nick and took a cab from Brooklyn back to 59th and Lexington. The driver said nothing when she handed him his fare and stepped out by the barricades. The pungent smell of exhaust added to the aroma of freshly laid asphalt as the cab turned and sped away. Krista glanced up at the buildings surrounding the intersection. She hoped some sort of memory would surface and pinpoint the exact location of Nick's small bar. She looked to the left, then to the right. For the life of her, she couldn't remember. She'd been running at the time, but couldn't recall how far she had made it before the red and yellow neon sign beckoned her through the haze of raindrops. While being chased, she hadn't thought to pay attention. When the cab had taken her away that night, exhaustion weighed on her, and she didn't think to memorize her surroundings. "You look a little lost," a man said from behind her. Krista spun, jumped back, and nearly fell over a damn orange cone. She gasped. How had he snuck up on her? "You again." "Well, hello to you too," he smiled. It was a normal response that didn't make him seem like a mysterious man who wandered the street. It almost acted as a diversion for his stalking abilities. A friendly smile to forget how dangerous he could be. "I'm sorry." Krista felt a sudden rush of heat in her cheeks. "You startled me." "Then, I suppose, it is I who should apologize." Krista shook her head and stepped away to put some distance between them. "No, that's okay." "Did your mother get a hold of you?" Krista nodded. "She called me and said you wanted to meet again." "I do. I didn't want to involve your mother, but the number Nick gave me to contact you was disconnected." Krista sighed. "I had my phone turned off. The one I have now is on my mother's plan." He held her stare. "Trying to hide, Krista?" "Something like that," she answered. Krista lowered her gaze when she felt his eyes on her. She tried to find something to occupy her focus in the darkness surrounding 59th. "I called Nick earlier and he said I could meet you at the bar." He merely shrugged. "I'm not big on meeting in public places." Krista hardly considered Nick's hole-in-the-wall bar a public place. It wasn't like she had asked him to meet her at Madison Square Garden. She shook the thought from her head. "Anyway, I was curious as to why you wanted to talk to me." "Oh, that." He started to walk the length of Lexington and nodded for her to fall into step beside him. "I've decided I want to help you." Now he wanted to help? Krista's heart beat faster by the second. She still didn't have $10,000 in her back pocket. "What about the payment?" "We'll discuss the payment later." "Why the sudden change of heart?" she asked, curious about his motive. It seemed a little suspicious. A man who left her stranded on the corner last night suddenly wanted to help her without any means of payment. "It's not important," he insisted. "It is important," Krista argued. "I want to know what it is you want." He looked slightly confused. "I want to help you. With no strings attached." Krista stopped walking. "I'm not buying it. A man who wanted thousands of dollars last night doesn't suddenly change his mind. Nothing is free." He stopped and turned to face her. "I never said my help was free." His voice stayed disturbingly calm. "I said we would discuss the payment later." "You expect me to just go along with that?" He shrugged. "I'm not the one who needs help." "Well, I don't want your help that bad," Krista shot back. His eyes watched her, that steady, overly calm, all too confident nature that reminded her a little too much of Christian. That irritated her even more. Krista shoved her hands in her pockets, turned her back, and walked away. "Forget it," she mumbled, more for her own peace of mind. "I don't need your help. I'll find him myself." His footsteps kept pace behind her. "What makes you think you're any kind of hunter?" "Oh, I can hunt if I want." Krista knew the statement held no real ground. Taking on the responsibility of actually hunting Christian was the farthest thing from her mind. Her only hope now was with Detective Weiss. The footsteps followed her. She felt like she was being stalked by a lion sensing prey. A stab of fear struck her. Did Nick's friend intend to follow her? What if she couldn't get rid of this guy? "Are you sure about that?" he finally asked. She didn't want to continue the conversation, especially since she wasn't confident enough to stand her ground. "Stop following me." "Suit yourself," he said calmly. Krista half expected him to stay behind her, to wait for her to change her mind. When she turned to confront him and found him gone, she didn't know whether to be surprised or disappointed. Now she was truly on her own. Krista let out a disgruntled sigh. What she wanted to do was find the bar and ask Nick about the problem with his friend. First, she needed to remember where the bar was. It's somewhere in this area. Krista retraced her steps back to the corner. She tried to imagine herself running through the rain, terrified for her life. The corners all looked the same as she walked the darkened streets. She took a right at 59th and periodically glanced down back alleys when her phone rang. Krista didn't need to look at the display to know who it was. Hello? I'm not even going to ask where you are. Her mother blared. Krista rolled her eyes. Good, because I don't think you'd want to know. Brenda groaned in her ear. I know one thing. You're not at home like you said you'd be over 2 hours ago. Would you believe I'm caught in traffic? Krista Lynn, her mother huffed. Where the hell are you? I thought you weren't going to ask. Don't get smart with me. Krista stared at street signs as she walked 59th. She looked to the right. The bright red and yellow neon sign stood out in the darkness. Finally, she thought. Krista turned the corner and headed for the bar. All right, Mom, Krista said as she prepared to hang up on her mother for the second time today. Everything's okay, but I have to go. Before her mother could respond, Krista ended the call. She'd pay for that later. As she moved closer, the neon sign left an eerie red stain on her skin that lifted as soon as she opened the door and stepped inside. The bar was warm and welcoming. Smoke streamed from lit cigars trapped in the fingers of 4 drunk men who tried their hands at poker. One of them glanced at her and offered an invitational smile as she passed the table. It was a flattering offer, but she'd have to refuse. With all her trouble over recent years, she planned to avoid hooking up with another deadbeat. Krista smiled at the bartender as she approached the bar. Hi, Nick. How about a drink? Nick returned her warm greeting. Well, if it isn't Krista. He reached into the cooler. Michelob Light? Krista accepted the beer as she glanced around the bar. Just like the last time, a sparse crowd sought refuge in the small bar. 2 people shared a conversation at the far table, while the 4 regulars played poker. 2 men sat at the bar. One was 4 stools to the left, and the other occupied the corner stool to the far right. He leaned against the wall and stared back at her. Krista's breath caught in her throat. She gripped the cold, brown-tinted bottle like a lifeline, her fingers clenched around the glass. It was him. The man on the far end was Nick's hush-hush friend. She'd already had 2 conversations with him, both of which had gotten her nowhere. She locked eyes with him, but the contact only lasted a second. His stony stare made her feel vulnerable. She lowered her eyes to her beer bottle and picked at the corner of the warning label. She didn't feel comfortable until Nick's pudgy hand guided the white towel in front of her along the hard oak. Krista quietly interrupted his gentle strokes. Nick? He raised his brow and leaned over the bar closer to her. What's the deal with your friend? Nick glanced down the bar at the man who occupied the farthest stool. How do you mean? Krista lowered her voice. He's kind of creepy. Creepy? Nick smiled. I don't know. That's the way he always acts. Most girls seem to go for his dark and mysterious personality. Well, it creeps me out, Krista admitted. She brought the bottle to her lips. The beer tasted cold and tangy against her tongue as she swallowed the first mouthful. Do you want me to talk to him? Krista frowned. No, it's just I needed some real help, and I thought, he. She glanced down the bar and her words slowly evaporated from her lips. Where did he go? Nick followed her gaze. Probably went home, I imagine. Her eyes drifted back to the bartender. Is he a good friend of yours? Good enough, I suppose. Curiosity got the better of her. How long have you known him? Well, he paused, lost in thought. 15 years, I guess. Around that long anyway. He brought his eyes back to hers, curiosity now written on his face. Why? 15 years. Wow, so he's an old friend of yours? Yeah, he's quiet, but he's a good guy. Oh, I see. Does he, do shady work? How do you mean? Do you trust him not to? I don't know. He just what? Krista gave up. She didn't know how to say that she didn't trust his friend not to try and kill her. She took another swallow of Michelob. I don't know what you're trying to say. All I know is that I asked him to talk to you, and he said he did. Nick leaned closer and lowered his voice. He also told me you didn't have his required fee. I asked him to help you anyway. That got Krista's attention. Oh, Nick shrugged. He said he'd think about it. When I talked to you earlier, I assumed you two were going to work something out. Oh, Krista said again. I think I might have squashed that bug. Say what? He approached me earlier and said he'd reconsidered and agreed to help me. I asked about the fee, but he told me we'd discuss it later. I didn't care for the implications of his offer, so I declined. Implications? The fee. You think? Nick stood back, clearly offended. He resumed the small circular motions he used to clean the bar. He stopped as quickly as he'd started and locked her in a pinning stare. Look here, I'm not in the habit of sending attractive young women to become toys of psychopathic madmen. If I give you the name of a friend, you can bet your ass he's clean. Krista's eyes widened at the sudden outburst. The backlash also attracted the attention of the bar's modest gathering. I'm sorry. I am grateful for your help. She never meant to insult Nick or his recommendations. In a matter of seconds, the bar no longer held a welcoming atmosphere for her. Krista slid the half-full bottle of Michelob Light back across the bar, threw a $5 bill on the oak, and stepped off the stool. Thanks for everything. I'll see you around. Nick slung the towel back over his shoulder as she turned away. Krista left and headed back along the street. She felt more alone than ever. The police didn't see the search as a priority. Nick didn't like her questioning his friend. She refused the only person who had offered to help because... why? Was she scared to trust him? Because he was creepy? Did she honestly believe she could find Christian on her own? Was she willing to try? There were too many unanswered questions. Too much had happened all at once. The pressure made Krista's head throb. Frustration, anger, hate, irritation, annoyance, it all plagued her, 1,000 little explosions erupting in different areas of her brain. Why couldn't the police just do their damn job and find Christian, put him in prison, and let her be free? Because they were lazy, she thought with disgust. That's not true, she reasoned. She knew they were busy. She wasn't the only person in New York City connected to a murder investigation. They couldn't. Clink. A noise? What was that? Krista's blood froze so quickly that she was sure her body temperature dropped 10 degrees. She hoped she imagined it. A grunt erupted from the shadows that led to a triumphant laugh. He was just a few steps behind her. She turned and nearly lost her balance as she came face to face with James and 2 of his 3 friends. They stood around her like wolves hunting a newborn fawn. Krista stepped back. Where do you think you're going? James asked. I told you we'd meet again. Krista took another step back. Somehow, he taunted, I just knew you'd be stupid enough to come back this way. Krista spun around. She planned to run, but stumbled over her first step when she found the 4th member of the street gang behind her with what looked like a butterfly knife and a grim expression. Over his shoulder, 2 more young men added to her discomfort. They surrounded her 6 to 1. James verbalized her worst fear. You won't get away this time.